Welcome to the University Elite Mental Health Podcast, where your host, Dr. Hans Watson, helps you to learn the why behind mental health issues that you or someone you love may be facing. Dr. Watson is a nationally renowned psychiatrist who is also an expert in psychotherapy, a war-proven leader of the U.S. military, and the only person we know to be an expert in psychiatry, psychodynamics, diet, leadership, trauma, addiction, marriage, education, and more. That's why he was the expert that was flown in to the other side of the country to train the therapists treating the victims and their families after the recent mass shootings you heard about in Florida. We are excited to help you to understand the why behind some real-life situations. And now, your host, Dr. Hans Watson, D.O.
All right, guys, welcome back to yet another podcast by University Elite. I'm Doc Watson. Like always, we have Jerem here with us, and today we're answering the question that was posed to us: why are mean girls so spiteful? And this term "mean girl" it comes from years of people deciding that was the term that goes to individuals. Another one that I've heard in the same vein is Queen Bee. And so what we're talking about here are individuals that tend to be head of different groups, and they tend to exclude or include people in their groups, and are quite vicious sometimes in their way of excluding or including in people. And so this is the question we're going to address today: is what's the psychology behind mean girls? And more importantly, we're going to talk about how somebody can work with a mean girl or interact with a mean girl, whether they're young or old. And so that's our goal today. So, before we get started, I'll tell you a story that I heard I'm up here in Montana currently, and I was talking with a principal, and he told me about a story of a group of young ladies, and it was in a small school to where the kids would go into the principal sometimes when they were having trouble with other ones, and they would kind of use the principal like many people use a counselor. And this principal told me that these young girls kept coming into the office, and it was the same group of about 5 girls, and then there was a 6th girl who this principal had termed as kind of the leader, and depending on where your group is, some people may call it the Queen Bee, and other people might call it the mean girl leader. But this girl would choose one week to say, okay, this girl's in the in group, and you get to be part of the friendship group. And then the next week, that girl would say, we don't want to be around you, and really quite hurtful, because in middle school and high school, it's so impactful to have friends. And so finally, this principal got so sick of it that the principal sat down with each of these girls individually when they come in crying, and said to them, well, why do you let this leader girl, and we'll call her the Queen Bee. I think that's kind of a fun term to steal it from people out there. And they said, why do you let this Queen Bee decide who gets to be in your group as a friend and who doesn't? And one by one, the girls kind of figured this out. And so the group members eventually just told this Queen Bee, we don't like you. You're not kind to us. You're mean, and you purposely kick people out, and then you include others, and to where nobody really knows if they're on good or bad terms. And we don't like that. We don't want to have you interact with us. And these 5 girls ended up making a friendship and excluding this girl that was so toxic and mean to them. And at the end of the day, the mother of that girl came in and said, why are you letting these 5 girls pick on my daughter and bully my daughter like that? And then to make matters even worse, the grandmother worked at the school and was convinced that these 5 girls had been picking on her granddaughter. And so that's the basis of this mean girl thing. And we're going to use that particular example to figure out how somebody navigates when they have an interaction with a mean girl, or maybe your kids have an interaction with a mean girl. And how do you do that? So we appreciate this submitted question. Jerem, what do you think right off the bat with such a loaded topic?
Well, I love a good mutiny. So I like that they kind of woke up and decided, yeah, we don't have to put up with this anymore. That's interesting. I don't have much experience, I don't think, with this topic. I've got one daughter. My youngest is a girl, and she's the youngest of five. I got four boys and a little girl who just turned 5 years old. And so I feel like I've been somewhat sheltered from this whole topic. And so I'm interested to hear from you and learn more about it.
Okay, so let's jump right into it. And I'm going to say you probably are less sheltered than you thought, but you didn't have the term for them is what I'm guessing. But maybe I'm wrong. Time will tell as we have a little conversation here. So before we get too far into it, I want to define what a mean girl, what creates a mean girl. Now, a mean girl or a queen bee, whichever term we are going to use, and I'm sure there's many other terms. You know, many people in Hollywood, they're often shown as the pretty girl who's also popular and is the prom queen, and sometimes that's true. Many times it's not. What really happens is mean girls are often individuals that have a very low self-esteem, and the foundation of this low self-esteem is that they fear. Well, the foundation of the low self-esteem is that they struggle to see the good in themselves. For whatever reason, there's 100 different reasons somebody might struggle to see the positive in themselves. But these young ladies and sometimes young men, we're going to talk about how a young man can also fit into the mean girl category without being a girl. But they have no sense of being worthwhile. And so they're actually filled with fear and terror that somebody else might see what they see when they look in the mirror. They're so terrified that people will recognize their flaws. This includes even their romantic interests, their partners, their spouses when they eventually get there. They're desperately trying to control the relationship so that it never becomes a topic or leads into an area where they might have to look in the mirror and identify a weakness or an inadequacy and have to confront that. So they just don't have enough self-esteem to be able to confront their weaknesses. And so that's one reason that they're unconsciously doing anything they can to steer the conversation or the relationship away from going to a deeper emotional level to where they might actually have to admit that they have some inadequacies or some difficult things that they're dealing with, because they're afraid that those people will see what they see when they look in the mirror. And so throw out the idea that all mean girls have to be popular or they have to be the prom queen. I've known many prom queens who are actually very kind and not mean girls, but I have known some that were the mean girl too, just like Hollywood portrays. And so that's the foundation of it. And that's why these mean girls oftentimes will only accept people into their group on the unconscious condition of they have to be able to determine who gets to come and who gets to go. They have to be able to determine what the topics that are cool to talk about are and that type of thing. They have to maintain that control, because otherwise, if you had an equal relationship, you might actually have to look in the mirror and confront one of your inadequacies. So that's going to be the foundation. What do you think about that, Jerem?
I think that's really interesting. It's amazing to me how often these conditions come back to control, and that struggle for where you said that they lack self-confidence. So I'm assuming that means that at some point in their life they've felt like they lacked control when they should have been in control of something, whether that's their appearance or the way other people treat them or the way that they feel perceived. And now they're trying desperately and in an unhealthy way, as often happens with people who don't understand control but feel starved of that control, trying to gain control. Am I completely off base there? Or
No, you've hit it. And let's go to a layer deeper. To maintain control is one thing. Why they need control is the most important thing. And the why is so that they can ensure that nobody brings up the topic of areas where they might have a weakness or an inadequacy. Even if it's only a perceived weakness or inadequacy, it's such a strong situation for them, and they don't have that emotional strength to be able to work through it. For instance, can you imagine if I were really worried about my appearance, and I thought I need long locks of hair, beautiful locks of hair. How inadequate would I feel that I'm completely bald?
right.
And I may turn into somebody who's trying to control a relationship simply so that you won't see that I have a bald spot that goes right around there. And
Right.
so kind of a silly example, but that's essentially what's going on. And in fact, it's so desperate to them that they're actually willing to do something in psychology and psychiatry we call splitting, which means if somebody's getting too close to that area where I can't tolerate confronting something that's hard for me to deal with in life, I'm actually going to unconsciously cause this group on the left to get in a fight with this group on the right. And so that now the focus will be them fighting, and I get to detract the focus from me doing that. So that may be one reason that, now this is many times completely unconscious, so that may be one reason that they kick a girl out. And to them, all they know is, I feel very angry. That person must have offended me. Therefore, this girl is kicked out because she's so offensive to me. Whereas when we get down to the psychodynamics, she's offended because she feels desperate that this person is getting too close to where she may actually start seeing some of the emotional warts and scars that this queen bee sees when she looks in the emotional mirror.
Interesting. So we all need some level of control, right? But a queen bee, maybe that's kind of off balance. They feel more desperate for control, or they need more control than other people to the point that it extends further, or
not really. No, what it is the control's not their biggest thing. The control is just a tool. The thing that they have to do is they have to avoid confronting emotionally difficult things. Okay. And so control is just the tool they're going to use to make sure that the friendship and the conversation and the relationship never go in that direction to where it's going to be necessary to confront that. And they'll go to extreme lengths to do that. One example would be queen bees are excellent at identifying an error in other people.
Right.
But they're terrible at recognizing when they commit the very same error. So queen bees are very quick to point out, oh yeah, well you did this. And it's the equivalent of me making fun of somebody. Haha, Jeremy, you're bald. And, but I'm completely oblivious that I have no hair on the top of my head. Right. And so, it's kind of an extreme example, but that's what they'll do. And so the queen bee is not wrong when he or she recognizes, hi, you're bald. And that's a negative thing. And clearly this is a silly example.
Right.
But they're completely oblivious to the fact that they're also bald. And so they're much more harsh because they don't recognize the very thing they're doing. And this is one reason that queen bees are so difficult to get along with is, how can you come to me and try to say I'm wrong for being bald and not look in the mirror and realize you're an okay person, you're bald too. So that's kind of a dramatic, silly example, but they will oftentimes be hypervigilant and correctly recognize other people's faults and completely miss that same fault is smacking them right in the face and everybody sees it in them. But when it's brought up, they're so fragile that they have to push it down into the unconscious. And therefore they say, why is everybody attacking me? Because they can't come to grips with, oh, I'm bald too.
That's really interesting. I see that a lot in politics. I've never had as good of an example to explain it, but I've always been so frustrated with that, where I'm like, you are out there just like pointing fingers. And I remember I had a boss once that told me this. He said, anytime you point the finger, just remember you've got 3 fingers pointing back at you. And I thought that was kind of interesting. But essentially, you're saying that they can't take a dose of their own medicine.
That's right.
People can make fun of other people, but they can't handle being made fun of themselves. And so, yeah, that's interesting.
So most of the people that are going to be watching this are adults. And so now that we understand what a queen bee looks like when they're in the adolescent phase, or in middle school, the high school, and we've all seen that queen bee many times, they're just, I've heard comments many times. I got these. I was a bit of a rambunctious and frankly odd person growing up. I thought differently, and thank goodness I did, because it's helping me to become who I am today, and I've learned to embrace it. But oftentimes I'd have certain individuals who would say, stop that. You're so dumb. And you see just how superficial that is. Why is it dumb? I'm being friendly to you. I'm joking with you. Why would that be dumb? Why is that embarrassing to you? And so it's only when you become an adult that you start to see that. And so we see that. And then the question becomes, what about when that person becomes an adult and I have to interact with them? Maybe I go to church with them. Maybe my children are friends with their children. Maybe, another way, they married one of my best friends, and like it or not, I have to like this spouse now. And
right.
So what does that look like? So that's the first thing is, okay, how does it morph into adulthood? So let's check that out. The first thing is we're going to see oftentimes children, not always, but many times children reflect their parents. So if you have a queen bee grandmother, guess what mother is likely going to be, or has a higher chance of being? And unless they find a great friend that says to them, hey, don't do that, you're really hurting my feelings, and they learn to progress and feel safe enough in a friendship that they can actually say, oh, I'm sorry, what did I do to to hurt your feelings? Then of course they could progress past the need to be a mean girl or a queen bee, and then they'd say, I'm sorry I did that. I'll stop doing that. And suddenly they become closer friends, and you can see how it's so productive, yet if you're too fragile, it's counterproductive. So that's the first thing is they'll oftentimes have children who are also queen bee, or grandma has a daughter who's a queen bee who then has a grandchild who's a queen bee. And so you'll see it in the family lines. And then another thing we'll see is you'll often see adults who are queen bees, not everybody, but many times adults who are queen bees, who are emotionally fragile, they want to relate with people who are on a similar emotional level. So how does this oftentimes manifest? Not always, but oftentimes. An adult will ask a child or an adolescent to call them by their first name. Generally, adults call other adults by their first name. That's kind of a rite of passage when you become an adult. Right. It goes from brother Jerem, or your last name, to hey Jerem, I'm now 19 or 20 years old. I've become an adult. I'm holding a job. I'm going to college. That is a rite of passage. I get to call you by your first name. I'm now also an adult. Whereas as a child, as I'm an adolescent and even a child, I probably should be calling you Mr. or Mrs. or brother or sister if you're in a church setting. So that's one of the easy things that you'll be able to see is if an adult says, oh no, call me by my first name to a child, your red flag should go up. Oh, is this somebody who might be emotionally weak, and therefore they're trying to relate with what makes them comfortable with, which is a much earlier maturity level emotionally. And so it's a way of unconsciously wishing you could go back to your glory days. If you look at it, a good example of a mean guy, mean girls or queen bee, a king bee or mean guy would be Uncle Rico. He's wishing he could go back to his glory days.
This is from Napoleon Dynamite, right?
Yes, the show Napoleon Dynamite. And Uncle Rico wants to go back and put me in the football game in the fourth quarter. We would have taken the state championship. And you can just see that emotional level. That's the equivalent of a queen bee, but a king bee, if you will, yeah, or a mean guy.
Right.
And so that's the first thing is you'll see them trying to relate with other kids on that level. Okay. And the foundation of all of this is, look, when you're in adolescence and childhood, you aren't good at reflecting on yourself or self-reflection. You're not good at saying, hey, Jerem and I are in a fight. Did I do something that could have contributed to the cause of this. Instead, it's, I'm going to paint Jerem as all bad and it's all his fault 100%. You see how they don't have enough emotional strength to say, what part of this could I have done differently? What part is mine? And so that's where we'll see that.
Is it extra difficult in that situation? Because we always hear it takes two to tango. So legitimately, part of it probably is Jerem's fault, right?
Yes.
But I want to focus on the other person's fault. They want to focus on my fault. We're both kind of inclined, and I would say maybe even more so inclined in that situation to be kind of queen bee.
That's right.
Then that would clash even more than normal. So
yes, and one of the things, I like where you're going. You're already jumping right into how do we put up with it. So one of the easy ways that we need to learn to put up with it is if you can recognize what I'm talking about, well, then you're already at a higher emotional level than you were in high school and middle school. Okay. And so sometimes the way we help our friends or those that we love is by modeling the very behavior we expect out of them. And so in this case, they say, it is your fault. And you'd say, I'm willing to look at my portion of it. And so we start by saying, I'm willing to look at my portion. And then we say, when we finish that, only after we've let them have their say, then we say, okay, I'd like a turn now to tell you your portion of it. Mm-hmm. And if they say no, you say, well, isn't this only fair that we each get a turn to tell our side? You got your side, I got mine. And many times, if they're unable, they'll cut you off. Oh, I can't be friends with you. And essentially they're doing you a service. I can't be friends with you. But many times what actually happens is these queen or king bees, you're the first one that has made it safe enough to where they were actually willing to look at themselves. They won't do it with anyone else. But with you, where you were willing to take the high road and say, yeah, I could see how that is. Man, sorry about that. I could change that. Hey, here's a little thing I was wondering if you could take a look at too and give me your opinion on. And then you get to do it. Oh, yeah, go ahead. You get to give it. And many times they'll reflect what you just did. Yeah, thanks. They won't thank you, but they might actually say, yeah, I'll look at that. And now suddenly you are modeling the very behavior you hope to. And so they're abandoning, you're no longer a threat. You now have become safe. And so they don't have to become splitting or that queen bee in your presence. You're a safe one.
Okay. Many times many times they will reflect what you've just done. Not guaranteed every time, but many times.
Oh, and in fact, let's do it this way. What if you're a queen bee and you are so bad at self-reflecting and you're so emotionally fragile that now you're blaming your daughter for being picked on when the 5 girls in the group say, get out of here. We're so sick of you abusing us. We don't want you to be part of our group anymore. You've ruined that. You've proven that you are just toxic. And now this mother says, how dare you bully my daughter like that? Now what's the emotion on top of that? Many people have nicknamed this the mama bear syndrome.
Right.
And people who say mama bear syndrome oftentimes are those who have no clue that what they have is a queen bee who is too emotionally fragile to look at their own side, and they're completely oblivious that they're blaming somebody for the very thing they've been doing. And so now you throw your child suffering on top of that. Right. How ferocious unconsciously are they going to defend against that? And the idea of not only am I doing it, now I'm teaching my daughter to do it. So I've ruined 2 generations. Can you see how dangerous? Those people are not going to abandon their mama bear or protecting their children. They're not going to be willing to say, hey, I'm self-reflecting. Turns out we really messed this up. We were really unkind to these 5 girls. That's why they did it. How about if we instead recognize our part and we'll go there and say, hey, we're sorry. Can we still be friends? And the 5 girls accept you. No, they can't do that. It's too emotional because they might actually have to face, and I'm ruining my daughter.
Right. Well, what I find really interesting about that is that there are a lot of people or situations where this kind of characteristic seems to coincide with that characteristic of mothers who kind of resent their daughters for getting the attention from the dad or whatever different reasons, it feels like sometimes they are at odds with their daughter. But then when their daughter all of a sudden can be seen as a victim, they turn into that mama bear.
Yes, very good. I love what you just brought up, because if you are a queen bee, you can't go to an emotionally deeper level. So who are you going to seek out unconsciously as a mate, a partner? I said pate. That's partner and mate is one. So who are you going to seek out in that? You're going to seek out somebody who is also going to stay very emotionally superficial. You're going to seek out Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite. It's going to be person who's still living in high school, because that's your emotional level. You need somebody who matches your emotional level. So you'll often see these people, they'll seek out individuals who have slight Asperger's type symptoms. These are people, Asperger's are people who their brain does not see the need to experience emotions. And that's another podcast as to why that happens. But these, Asperger's is thought of, and many in the DSM-5, it's even categorized as a very, very light version of autism symptoms. They're not autistic individuals, but they have some autism symptoms. And one of the big ones is they just plain don't catch a lot of the social norms. And so they don't go to a deeper emotional level. Everything's completely logical. You think of Spock from the Star Trek. That would be about like Asperger's, to where there's no emotion. Well, isn't that perfect for a queen bee? Or the other option is, if they need a little emotion, why not get somebody who's still the jock in high school and they still hang around and they try to live through their kids' sports or their kids' things in high school. They're trying to get back to their own glory days. So they'll marry somebody else who wants to get back to the glory days of high school, even if that means marrying the high school jock who's not going to treat you as well, but unconsciously they're on your emotional level.
Interesting. Okay. So earlier you were saying it's kind of, in dealing with this, it's seek first to understand, then to be understood. And
yes, that's right.
And saying that's the only way you can deal with this is by first giving them what they need, which is that understanding and that admission of my side of things. Okay, yep, I hear what you're saying, reflective listening. You're right, I did that wrong, I did this wrong. Now, can I have a chance to explain my concerns?
Yes, okay. And if you do that, many times what happens is, and I hate to put it this way, the queen bees will often pick a doormat for their spouse.
Yeah.
You will often see the queen bee, and whether she was popular or not, she's going to pick a doormat who lets her walk all over her, and he's happy with it. For whatever reason, that's okay. And if that works for them, that's just fine. But the problem becomes, well, then what about the queen bee? Because the guys who are doormats, they often are really nice guys. So they have everybody who wants to be their friend, but they hate being around their bossy and controlling and often emotionally detached and oblivious to their own problems that they're pointing out to others, spouse. And so that spouse is sitting there saying, this person's bad, that person's bad, because anybody who forces them to self-reflect, they unconsciously see that as an attack, because it's forcing them to do something they don't have the emotional stability to do. And therefore, a lot of guys will say, man, I'd love to hang out with Doc Watson, but man, it's just torture to be around his queen bee wife. And so oftentimes these doormats are perfect for them because they can control everything. And if that doormat starts getting too close to their emotional area, that they're fragile, they can become angry, and the doormat, oh, I'm so sorry, what did I do? And so there has to be a level of saying, yes, you accept what you did wrong, but then in order to have a real relationship, there has to be some acceptance of saying, and now I get a turn to give you my perception, what you did wrong. And without that, there's not going to be a healthy relationship. A doormat may put up with it forever, but that doesn't mean it's healthy.
Okay.
They're fulfilled. And I deal with that in psychotherapy with people that everybody else would say they're so happy, and then they come into psychotherapy and they're like, I'm miserable, but you better not tell anybody I ever said that.
Right. Because that will only make it worse.
Yes.
Right.
So where do we typically find these queen bees? Well, what are their glory days, Jaron? When's a queen bee's glory day?
High school.
High school.
Right.
So where do you think these queen bees have the emotional strength to go and do extremely hard things generally, like college and get a degree and these types of things? Not most of the time. They're most comfortable in high school, and most of the time they do not have the resiliency to be able to get a degree. So in what types of jobs in the high school often will you see them?
As a teacher, or, well, I guess you
need a degree, right?
Yeah, right.
So they'll be secretaries.
Okay.
They'll be lunch ladies. They'll be custodians. And not all lunch ladies, secretaries, don't misinterpret this. Mm-hmm. Many more of the secretaries and lunch ladies and custodians are not queen bees, and they're extremely emotionally strong individuals. But among those that are weak, those are jobs where you'll often see them. You'll see them in other places like medical offices as secretaries and receptionists. This is where oftentimes the queen bee finds herself, because she can't tolerate the emotional difficulty that comes with getting the degree, and unconsciously she's striving to be back in an environment where she fits in with her maturity level. High school, middle school. That's why oftentimes you will see them as the secretaries. And are they content letting the person with the education and the credentials being in charge? No, because they might take it to a place that they're emotionally uncomfortable. So this oftentimes, when you do see them, these aren't your secretaries who are wonderful. Instead, these are your secretaries who are trying to do the principal's job, or they're the secretaries who think they're going to tell the doctor what the best case of action is.
Right.
You can see how that works.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And for men, that might be janitors and repair jobs, and even coaching. I know that I don't want to expose too much, but we had a coach in a age bracket in a town that I may or may not have lived in growing up, who was pretty unstable. He would throw kids across the room and things, through a barbell through the wall, and some things. What's your take on that? Where are the men, the king bees, going to be kind of found?
Sounds to me exactly like somebody who is a king bee. They're going to be emotionally unable to do hard things, and you can see they'll lash out in ways, whether it's excluding certain people from the group that make them, that essentially cause the relationship to go towards confronting their inadequacies, or whether it's lashing out in the opposite direction, which is throwing kids or dumbbells through the wall. You're seeing that either way, this is a sign of complete emotional fragility. And so that's tough for them. And it takes psychotherapy and trusting relationships for them to learn to overcome that and realize they're okay in spite of being a flawed individual. And so this also is seen when these people oftentimes unconsciously will live through their children. Your child's in school, and so they're kind of living their glory days through their kids. We've all seen that parent who is still trying to do anything they can to stay connected to high school.
Right.
Maybe they're even if they do, many times king bees, for some reason, they're able to get degrees. And then they'll immediately go back and they never miss a high school football game, and they'll attend half of the practices, and it doesn't even mean their kids are in it, but they get way too enmeshed in that culture. Nothing wrong with helping out the team. In fact, that's a huge service. But when you start becoming one of the kids emotionally, that's when you know you're a king bee. And what happens then when they lose that connection to high school and their children graduate? We often see anxiety depression in those years after they become an empty nester? And did they cultivate a deep and emotional relationship with that spouse of theirs? Once the distraction of the kids are out of the home, they have no relationship with that husband or wife. So their marriage oftentimes falls apart. So you can see how this is, that it's a terrible thing to let keep going on and not work on.
Right. Okay. So I try not to name names, but this is a very public and out there name. Brock Turner. You know the name?
I don't have a clue who that individual is.
Okay. Brock Turner was a college kid on track to be a huge Olympic swimming star, and was on his way home from a party in college, found a girl passed out, and did some horrific things to her.
Did he sexually assault her, is what I'm assuming?
He did, yeah, okay. In the most horrific ways possible. Okay. Destroyed her ability to ever have children, destroyed her future. And his dad in court stood up and testified that 15 minutes of stupidity shouldn't ruin the rest of his life. And here's this girl who the rest of her life has been ruined. And I just remember being utterly dumbfounded that a parent could act that way. And then to see this example where somebody's saying, oh, I don't even have a second thought about the victim in this situation, but my child shouldn't have the rest of his life ruined for 15 minutes of his behavior, not even considering the consequences to the victim.
So you're seeing a perfect example that you just gave, and a very extreme and tragic example, but it's still perfect in that he was able to recognize that, hey, you shouldn't ruin somebody's life based on a momentary desire. You know, it's just a momentary desire to punish this kid. This will pass. But he totally missed the obvious one, which was, but my kid did this. And if he had done that, would he have had to look in the mirror and said, I taught him these behaviors by doing this or that? You know, maybe not to that level, not the same behavior, but if you don't teach somebody responsibility and that your consequences have actions, maybe that leads to eventually step by step getting worse. And so a lot of times this is the very thing that people do, is they can't look in the mirror because unconsciously they would have to look at themselves. And certainly I don't want to blame all parents. Children make decisions that are completely the opposite of how they were raised, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they're just reflecting what they were taught, right, and the examples they had. And so,
well, and in this case, this was on the national news, and that was everybody's response. It was like, oh, no wonder the kid did something like that, if this is the kind of parenting he had. And it goes back to what you were saying with people being completely oblivious. I would have been very embarrassed to defend my child like that on national TV, where everyone, that attention would be like, whoa, you're a bad parent. And it seems like this parent was not even cognizant of that being a possible reaction.
So you can see how being emotionally fragile, and we're all emotionally fragile in some way.
Yeah.
But if that emotionally fragile way takes you to a position to where you can't logically think through things anymore, that's where we're going to be in trouble. And that is where queen bees and king bees live. And so you know, when you're dealing with these people, the first thing I would tell you is don't react in an emotional way like they have, because now you're demonstrating to them this is the appropriate way to react when you're overwhelmed. Instead, stop and realize they are so emotionally fragile that I shouldn't feel anger towards them. I should feel some compassion, some empathy. Can you imagine how miserable their life is because they will never be able to avoid adversity and they don't have the skills to deal with it? They're being asked to be an adult or do that job that they don't have the fundamental tools to do. They likely need a good friend and some psychotherapy to be able to overcome this. And if they do overcome it, they're a threat of now not having a connection with their mother or father, because their mother or father aren't going to want to be around somebody who reminds them that they're inadequate.
Right.
And so that's often a problem with therapy. As people get stronger, if the couple doesn't get stronger together, what you're looking at is it often breaks a couple up because now they're not on that same emotional level. And so the queen bee gets therapy, gets better. Well, the high school jock that can't leave high school, he's not better. He doesn't want to have these deeper emotional relationships and conversations where they look in the mirror and self-reflect. So now they break up and they just use the superficial thing to break up. Oh, you're always picking at me. You're just trying to control me. And what they're really saying is, I don't have the strength to be able to self-reflect. I'm too fragile. Therefore, when we deal with that as adults, the first thing we can do to not let them just drive us batty is realize that. The second thing we can do is kindly put in firm boundaries. You don't get to bring a problem to me if you're not willing to hear my side and be able to receive what I think you need to work on as well. This isn't a one-sided work on it, either both of us or none of us. And so you'll see them quickly withdraw. And so it's going to take maturity and even some brotherly love to do that. So when you do that, the biggest tool you have is recognizing just how miserable they are. And that often allows us to have compassion. And then we can kindly say, you know, Jerem, if you want to bring up things that I'm doing wrong, I'm always open to hear it. But you have to be open to hearing my side of it too, and me pointing out where you're wrong. And that's tough for them. But you'll see people grow. And oftentimes okay, well, I'll hear it. And the first time they're not going to hear it. And then the second time they're actually considering, a third time they might actually implement some changes. And sometimes it takes more times, but that's kind of how you do that. So that's the queen bee. That's what's going on. I hope it helps some people to realize what's happening. And oftentimes if that grandmother is a queen bee and that mother's a queen bee, you're not going to have any other option than to do like this principal did when she said, why do you continue to let her be in your friend group, you five? If you five kicked her out, she wouldn't have a friend. And even though mom and grandma both talk about how their daughter's being bullied, the truth of the matter was those five girls, according to that principal, they were as happy and as close a group, and they didn't have to come in crying into her office ever again. So,
Awesome.
So that's kind of the answer to our question, which was, why are they so spiteful? And the answer is, they're just that fragile. And so as you're dealing with them, show a little compassion, give some firm boundaries, and be patient. And you should come out, and I'll be honest with you, I have many jocks and queen bees that I'm very good friends with because I've done that, and they do grow and they do mature, even if it's just in the interactions with me. So if you have any more questions, remember, on the universityelite.com website, you can go to the Ask the Doc section, submit your question. We'll keep you anonymous, and we'd be happy to answer your questions, and you just might get a podcast out of it. So any parting words, Jerem?
Just the focus on patience. When you said that oftentimes they will respond in kind, I was like, oh, okay, I'm really going to have to focus on that often. It's not a guarantee that they'll do that every time, but having patience and working towards that eventually will improve the situation, it sounds like.
That's right. Okay, until next time, I'm Doc Watson. That's Jerem. We'll see you on the next one.